What's up, everybody? A Sparrow with a Gun here from Sleepless Night Studios, and welcome to the first episode on what I'm currently dubbing the Space Engineers Dissection series. I don't really know if I'm going to keep that title or not, we'll have to see, but basically it was a suggestion that I got from one of my subscribers/viewers, I believe, to do a series where I more thoroughly break down a ship that we've seen in the Inspiration series and stuff like that, or at least ship builds in general. I'm going to get a little bit more into how the series works and stuff towards the end of the video, so that anybody that's not interested in the inner goings-on and how to do all that kind of stuff doesn't have to pay attention to it if they don't want to. So let's just get right into the build, shall we? Alright, so this is the build. We're taking a look at the ArchDruid from the Inspiration series that we featured last episode. I believe it's by AlloyCat. And I picked this one because, like I said, I think I'm going to be pulling my dissection builds from the Inspiration series, and out of the three, I think this had some of the most complex building techniques, where some of the different ships may look cool or be a bigger, like that one Super Destroyer was kind of a Borg-looking ship, and I think that one was a bit more grandiose in scale. I don't think there was quite as many building techniques to actually dissect, hence the name of the series. So we'll get started with this one. So basically what this series is going to be doing is taking one build instead of three and really taking a closer look at the actual how to do some of the different things that when I'm walking through the showcases on the Inspiration going, oh, that looks cool, and then moving on, this is going to be taking a closer look at it. For example, I do like this circular pattern here for a thruster setup. I think it's really cool. It's also very symmetrical, and I think there was similar stuff here as well. Excuse me. So, let's start with this one over here. Now, circles are always something that I find hard to do in Space Engineers because there's no real circle blocks. There's the curves, but unless you're doing a complete circle, there's no way to do like gradual curves. But this does a really good job. So there's, for the thruster cluster, that's what that's what we should call things, not thruster cluster. So there are 4 large ion thrusters in a plus pattern with a hydrogen in the middle, and 4 smaller thrusters on the sides of the large ones for the ions, separated by a couple of angle slopes or full blocks, it actually looks like. Yeah, so these are full blocks, and it goes to a slope that then connects to the rest of the frame. So for this part, you've got a spacer block right here, and then there are a ramp. There is a ramp on both sides facing the slope block, and then there's ones pointed in the opposite direction doing the same thing, and it makes up your curved circle. And I suppose this could work with bigger scales. You would just have to go probably 2 ramps, and then 2 ramps going the opposite direction. So because you've got these forming this kind of corner but slope corner, it creates kind of this jagged circle. And then to do the outer frame, it looks like they're using inverted and regular corners to basically do a double layer of the same type of shape, combined with slope blocks on the straight edges, on the plus side edges, as you can see there, and then in the corners they're using an inverted corner to connect the 2 ramps up. So overall, I like that idea, and then it kind of translates over to the other side as well to keep that slope shape kind of going, which is pretty cool. Alright, so next up we have this back area, which kind of makes use of a similar type of technique, but then also has this kind of half kind of shape that's cut into it, which makes the circle end up looking more like a crescent moon shape than a full circle. And you can also see that there was a little bit done here to smooth out the edge, which is similar to what I mentioned before, only they used a different technique, and it's not just making the circle bigger. This is actually to smooth it. So what this is kind of the same idea here. We've got a light block here as the base of the shape, and then we're using the ramp to create the edge, but instead of going to the opposite direction ramp, they've added a slope here. And so as you can see from back here, it kind of just adds a curved shape and it kind of smooths out the angle, as opposed to this, which actually uses the first technique, which is just back-to-back ramps. And you can tell it's a little bit more jagged. This one's a little bit smoother. It's also a little bit bigger, just a touch, not too much. Actually, I'm not really 100% sure that that is any bigger, to be honest. It has to be a little bit because they have an extra block right here, but it's to the eye, though, they're very, very close. But so if you wanted it a little bit smoother, you could add another slope in here. And then this part, I think this is one of those where there's really no perfect way to do it, because it ends up having a slope block here and then trying to marry into these curves from the rest of the shape, which is really tough to do, but I think it works out pretty well. But then the inverse part that gives it that crescent shape is these ramps here, where you've got the slopes and then a nose, but then they go to a half block. And this is an interesting technique I'm seeing more and more of in the inspiration style showcases, because what it's basically doing is if you bring a base here, then you have to do a full block. So for example, since this is the dissection series, I don't care about breaking things. So you would have to bring it up to this height, which doesn't work. And it also doesn't allow for this spacing, because you would actually need to have a base where this block is, and then you would need a base for the one next to it. So this should actually be a 4-block. You know, you'd have the nose basically right above this one, so it wouldn't fit, it wouldn't work. So by making use of the half blocks, it's essentially cutting out the need for a base, and it allows you to keep this same angle but then shorten it. Essentially, you can close off the angle and level off without having to go as high, which is really cool technique. Now you can see this kind of technique here too, where they blend together to add some more depth. And this is kind of doing what I was talking about. So basically you've got a slope nose and a base, and a slope nose and a half block to give you a wider but a bit more shallowed slope here. But then over here you have a slope, a base, and then just a light block rather than another row of the nose and the half block. You just go straight to the solid block, and then that's basically setting it a little bit lower, so you get this cool kind of depth contrast here, which is pretty neat. Alright, now here's a tried and true one ever since Keen added the 2x1 ramps. This kind of technique I've seen in countless ships now, and it never gets old. And there's variants on it. There's actually a couple variants in this ship itself, which we'll go over in a second. But using the combination of armor slope, base, or nose blocks, or I forget what they're actually called, but I think they might just be called slopes. I don't know, the 2x1 slopes. But you have the base here, and then you have a regular slope block, which are at a different angle. And it gives a little bit more depth and texture to your hallways and things, because there's a little bit of an indentation and an offset to these. It's not just, it's not like going through here with just sloped, angled base blocks to give it just an angled wall. There's actually kind of a bit of a texturing contrast kind of thing. Now, I'm coming back through this area because there's a couple of spots where this is shown off very well. Tip, that's what it is, not nose. I call them noses, but... So this is another example of using two back-to-back, opposite-facing armor slope tips to create another angular shape, but then putting two base ones back-to-back, and you create... trying to see if there was one where they did it. Alright, so I went ahead and did a bit of editing here and took out the programmable block just to show you an example of what I was trying to get across. This kind of a shape gives you a lot more texture and detail to your hallways and stuff like that. But again, it's basically just putting two bases back to back and two tips back to back. And it creates this illusion of multi-layered or multi-leveled angles, but really you're just using two different kinds of blocks and alternating them, and it creates this kind of pattern, which is really cool. Another pattern that I saw a lot in this ship is this kind of cornering, which uses the 2x1 corner bases as well as the slope bases, and it basically creates this corner with this, while it still holds its shape, it still creates the same pattern, but it allows you to go around a corner, and that's pretty cool. It's really neat the way that that lets you hold the shape to where you can keep this kind of pattern going all throughout your hallways. And there was objects that they wanted to put here and things like that, so the corner got closed off. But theoretically, if you wanted to keep the hallway going, like these over here, and you're just trying to go around a corner and keep your shape, then theoretically you could actually just do it like this. Oh wait, is that that's the tips? I'm making a mess. Alright, so here's a better example of what I was trying to get across. It's a little bit of a rough, because I just kind of cut things up and put it where I want it. But basically, if you were coming along this way, and you came around here, then you could just keep going with this alternating column shape, and it would just allow you to keep moving through as you went around corners. So that's why this corner technique is pretty cool. You can also use it to close off the corner, as they did here, and it still works. Alright, so back out here on the outside of the ship, you can actually see a couple more examples of how the, what I would call the staggering depth techniques, such as the alternating the ramps or raising one up higher and alternating the other one lower, such as what's being done right here, with the tip and the base being here, and this just runs a straight ramp, and then this is one space out from where these two are. So it brings the ramp height up one, but like I said before, when they get up to the top here, you switch over to the half armor blocks and it keeps the angle going perfectly. So this is another example of how this can be used to increase your depth and details and stuff like that. So here's another example of how to use this basically inverted, where you have the higher ones on the outside and the smaller or lower set of ramps on the internal track, where it makes use of the half armor blocks, and the outer one is using your full light blocks, and it connects to a base, and it goes out a little bit further. So that's another way you can do it, but all of these just basically add to the detail and vary the depth of the ship, so it's not just all one flat shape. Another example is over here, using it as a way to kind of create these bands, these circular type of shapes, and then they even left out the half armor blocks here to just give it a little bit more uniqueness and a little bit more decorative shape to it. One thing I also really liked about this ship is if you pan back and really look, it makes a lot of use of angles. It kind of keeps these 2x1 armor slope corners and stuff like that flowing, that even if it stops, it kind of picks up somewhere else and keeps going, which is really tricky to do. I know if you're anything like me, I have a hard time with knowing how to keep the angle shapes flowing without just cutting them off. And there are a couple instances here where it just has to be done. This is a good example here, where you're bringing this shape to the edge, but then they didn't put a corner block here, because then it would have messed with this shape here. So you just opt to leave it as just a flat edge, and then it keeps this shape kind of undisturbed, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so a lot of these tricks with the ramps and the corners is what makes this ship design really pop and really work. Because like I said, you've got these varying ramp depth here to give it more detail, but then when it gets up to the top here, you've got the ramp, or the corner slopes that keep going, and the curves keep going around and stuff. They don't just stop. Or they usually, one good instance is over here, where this shape here, once it's done and it loops back up, when it gets up here, it just starts another one. Is another example of a cool way to kind of keep everything flowing, which is really neat. One other shape design I wanted to point out that I really like on this ship is these angular pillar support frame things. I don't know what they would actually be called. It's a fairly simple technique to do, but it kind of takes some practice to do it correctly. Not correctly, make it effective is a better way to put it, because there really is no right or wrong, but some things just end up looking a little nicer. So, for example, what this is basically doing is connecting these. You have an inverted corner, I believe. I have to turn my HUD on, that would be smart. Inverted corner to a regular corner to give you a 2-block step. But then when you get here, where you have inverted and regular, then you put another inverted and a regular, and then it kind of just starts. You have regular corner and inverted and a regular, and it starts filling out the pillar a little bit. And then when you reach a level off point, you just kind of start either like what they did here, where you merge into another shape, or you just kind of level it off and flatten it out. But when you pan back, if you have a couple of these, it really gives it some cool line depth kind of thing. I think that's kind of neat. Especially this one that goes down lower than the rest and then kind of springs back up and creates this kind of frame, I would say, around the rest of the ship. I think that's pretty cool. Not a particularly difficult technique to understand, but used in the right way can actually be really, really neat. Now, one other thing I'd like to talk about, it's a little bit more on the mechanical side, but it still has a bit more of a building technique to it, is this ship. For those of you that aren't aware, I showcased it in the last episode of the Inspiration series, and it's actually 3 ships in one. This edge right here starts the edge of one of the carriers, and then the same thing is going on over here for a second carrier, and then you have the base carrier ship here. I don't know if it's a carrier or not, but you have the base ship there. And so there's actually 3 ships here, 2 of which are merge block, but it's very difficult to notice that at first glance. Not only because the ship design works really well to look as though it's one ship. I mean, we've seen a lot of even fighter small type vessels that have this kind of like 2 arms sticking out kind of shape. So it's very easy to trick yourself into thinking that it's, or to be tricked into thinking that it's one ship. But one of the things that I think works so well at hiding this is how far back the merge blocks are placed. They're way back here with the connectors, which is very far out of the eye's view from the surface. I mean, what I'm kind of getting at is there's a lot of overhanging structure from the base ship. It's not just like the merge block is right here or something that would easily be spotted from a distance. Even up close, it's hard to find the merge blocks because they're way far back there. And I think this comes from these kinds of shapes here that, for one, they're very close together. It's almost the same exact shape, but like mirrored. So where this angle is going this way, this one is going the opposite direction. Well, it's not really the opposite direction, but it's the opposite kind of way of doing it, where in this one you have all the slopes facing this way. You'd have to rotate the blocks and face them the other way, but essentially the angles are the same. It's more of a outward facing and an inverted, but the angles themselves are actually the same thing. So it creates this kind of symmetry that allows the ships to fit in here very snug, but then the builder actually took these angles and ran them far enough out before closing it off, and it runs all the way out here before it starts creating this frame here that's not actually connected to the carrier. So the shapes are similar enough and they go on far enough that even at a glance you just don't see the merging area from very many angles. You can kind of see it from back here, But again, it's where the angle stops kind of going this way, and it actually turns and goes around towards the back. That's when you can actually start seeing it. But until you hit that turning point, it's very, very difficult to actually see where the merge point really is. And of course, in order to get it this snug, the thrusters had to be turned off, because otherwise, if you had block damage on, you damaged this back here when you pushed forward. But still, the effect is really, really well done, because again, when you're just flying around the ship and stuff, you just don't see it. It's very, even that, when you can see the little orange light back there at a glance flying by, you'd be hard pressed to detect that that's where the actual merge point is, which I found to be very cool, because a lot of times when you have connected ships like this, it's usually pretty easy to spot. It's typically not too difficult to notice where they've connected it, and this one, I looked at the screenshots and stuff, and it took me a minute before I read the description and realized it was actually 3 ships, which is really cool. So, let's see, is there anything else I want to go over on this build? I don't think so. A lot of it is the same idea, but done all over the place. The alternating ramp, or alternate, what did I call it? The, I don't remember. The extra depth type thing, the alternating ramp depth method is done a lot. These connected circles are done, and they're, again, this whole kind of theme with this ship is one shape merging into another shape and continuing along the rest of the hull. There's very few points where a shape actually just stops. And I think that's what gives it its cool, angular, very free-flowing kind of style, along with the high contrast color palette. But yeah, I think as far as building techniques, I've gone over most of the key ones that I noticed, but it's mostly just applying them very effectively and doing them quite frequently throughout the whole build that made it really work. But I don't think there's too many different kinds of techniques that are blended in here. It's just a couple of them that were done really, really well. Alright, well, I think that about does it for the dissection of this build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now, for a little bit of how I'd like this series to go, this is kind of my experimental episode. I've never really attempted to do something like this before, frankly, because I'm not particularly someone that I would consider to be an expert on the topic of building, hence why I started the Inspiration series, was to also help myself learn. But after doing the Inspiration series as long as I have noticed some typical building methods that a lot of builders use that kind of stand out when you're like, oh, that's them, you know, or this is a cool one. Oh, of course it's that builder. You know, they always do really neat stuff. I've tended to find they use similar or continually use the same techniques to really good results. But again, I was asking for for those of you that may not be aware, I've been changing my schedule around. This week starts my new schedule, which I haven't actually posted anywhere. I may make a separate announcement video about it just so that everybody gets a chance to see it. But the new schedule will be the Dissection series, or that's this series of episodes. I don't know that I'm going to stay with that title, but for now, that's what I'm calling it. Will be on Tuesdays. The Inspiration series is moving to Wednesdays. The standard survival Let's Play will be on Saturdays, and I'm going to bring back the Let's Build series on Sundays. So it'll kind of be an every other day other than the weekend where I'll be back to back. There was an episode for the Space Engineers Let's Play episode on Monday this week. However, that was just kind of left over from my previous schedule just until I got my new one up and running. So this week will start the new schedule for that. For how this series is going to work, though, I'm typically planning on pulling builds from the Inspiration series episodes, and I'm going to do that based on you guys' feedback. So I usually feature 3 builds in my Inspiration series, so I'm going to leave a poll at the end of those videos where you can vote for what ship you'd like to see in more detail and broken apart kind of thing. And again, this is kind of my testing episode, so let me know if there's things that you liked about the way I'm doing these, if there's things that you think would improve it or help you better understand some of the techniques that I'm talking about. If it doesn't kind of come across clear, if you'd like more closed test environment examples, like just done in a standard creative world with a flat building platform and then just a couple of the ramps and slopes and things put together so that you can see it very clearly and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, I can do that too. So any kind of feedback like that. I got this idea from one of my viewers when I mentioned not being super sure about my schedule and possibly doing 2 episodes of my Let's Play. It was suggested to do a series where I really broke down the building techniques and not just said, oh, that's cool, and then kind of moved on like I typically do in my inspiration series, which is fine. Because it would tend to let me breathe a little bit easier with the inspiration one anyway, and I could actually focus on more of the visuals and what I think is cool. This one would let me actually go through and really break down why these builds work and what I think is neat about them. So, but like I said, I'm not even sure if I'm going to stick with dissection or not. I thought about trying to incorporate reverse engineer into the title, given the irony of it being space engineers, you know, space reverse engineering or something. But some of those titles sounded like they'd be too long, so I'm going with this for now. But any and all feedback on this episode would be very welcome because I'm kind of throwing it out there as a test. But I'd like to see what you guys think as far as, would you like it to be less choppy, more free flow, or more chopped up and more specific, more concise, more visual? Like I said, I didn't really dissect. I was more pointing out things. But if you'd like me to actually break things on the build to show you what I'm talking about, or explain it and then cut over to some kind of test environment where it's just a flat plane in creative world and it's like built up just to show you exactly what I'm talking about, I can try and incorporate more of that into my episodes in the future. But yeah, so if you like this style of episode, let me know. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, message me, anything like that always helps me out. If you have ideas or feedback on what you liked and didn't like about the series or about the episode, but would like to see more of it just improved, do let me know about that as well. And again, if you'd like to see more of these episodes, then on the inspiration series, definitely use the polls and tell me which ones in that episode you'd like to see. And then the next week, so basically the inspiration series will air on Thursday, and then the next following Tuesday will be another episode of this series where I pick one of the things that everybody voted on, kind of thing. Also, if there's anything about this particular build that you saw this episode that you found that I didn't point out, or you thought that could have been done better, or you missed this, or I thought this was cool, let me know. But I think that's going to do it for this episode. Again, I'm not sure on length of the videos or anything like that, or if I'm just going to go until I'm done finding all the techniques, and the video episode length will vary. I'm not really sure. This one's just kind of my test episode. To get my feet wet and get you guys' feedback, and so we can improve it as we go. So let me know all of that stuff. Give me all your feedback and whatnot. But in the meantime, we're going to wrap this one up here. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, and I will see you guys later. Peace.